For 15 years, my daughter Jessica told me I embarrassed her family. She said I was too old, too poor, and too out of touch to be seen with her successful friends. Last month, she discovered my $7 million fortune and suddenly wanted to reconcile. She brought lawyers, inheritance documents, and a plan to move me into assisted living so she could manage my assets. What she didn't know was that I'd been recording every conversation for 3 months. And when I called my lawyer that evening, it wasn't to discuss estate planning.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you.
I'm Harold Martinez, and at 73 years old, I've learned that family isn't always blood, and blood isn't always family. This story starts 15 years ago when my wife Margaret passed away and my daughter Jessica decided I was more liability than father. Most people who meet me see exactly what Jessica sees: an elderly man who drives a 1998 Honda Civic with rust spots and duct tape holding the passenger mirror on. Someone who shops at dollar stores, clips coupons religiously, and wears the same 3 flannel shirts in rotation. At family gatherings, I'm the grandfather who tells the same stories about the Korean War, who doesn't understand smartphones, and who embarrasses everyone by asking for senior discounts at restaurants. Jessica Martinez-Chen, 42 years old, marketing executive at a Fortune 500 pharmaceutical company, lives in a gated community in Westchester County with her investment banker husband, David, and their twin daughters. She drives a BMW X7, wears designer suits that cost more than some people's monthly rent, and has spent the better part of 2 decades perfecting the art of social climbing. In her world, I'm the inconvenient reminder of her middle-class origins, the father who worked construction for 40 years and never quite learned how to fit into her carefully curated lifestyle. The first sign I was losing my daughter happened 6 months after Margaret's funeral. Jessica suggested I might be happier in a senior living facility. Nothing fancy, she assured me, just somewhere with activities and people my own age. Somewhere I wouldn't have to worry about maintaining a house or driving in traffic or any of the complicated parts of modern life. When I declined, she started visiting less frequently. Phone calls became shorter. Invitations to family dinners grew rare. The excuses started small. Dad, the girls have so much homework. Maybe next weekend. Dad, David's parents are coming to town. It's going to be hectic. Dad, we're having people over for dinner, and you know how you feel about crowds. Within 2 years, I saw my granddaughters maybe 6 times annually, usually at major holidays when my absence would be too obvious to explain. But the real shift came when Jessica met the Chens. David's family had money. Old money, the kind that comes with trust funds and country club memberships and assumptions about how successful people should look and behave. At my first dinner with David's parents, I committed the cardinal sin of mentioning that I'd gotten my shirt on sale at Walmart. The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know about my place in Jessica's new hierarchy. From that point forward, I became the family secret. When David's colleagues came for dinner parties, I wasn't invited. When the twins had school events that required grandparent attendance, somehow the dates always conflicted with something I supposedly couldn't handle. Jessica developed an elaborate system of managing my existence, keeping me just involved enough to avoid looking like a neglectful daughter, while ensuring I never interfered with her social aspirations. The breaking point should have been 3 years ago at Emma's high school graduation. I arrived wearing my best suit, the same navy blue one I'd worn to Margaret's funeral, carrying flowers I'd picked from my garden. Jessica took one look at me and her face went pale. "Dad," she whispered, pulling me aside, "you can't sit with us. David's entire family is here, plus people from his firm. There's been a misunderstanding about seating arrangements." She handed me a ticket for the general admissions section, 6 rows behind the family area, and walked away. I sat alone, watching my granddaughter graduate, surrounded by strangers, while my own family pretended I didn't exist. When Emma walked across that stage, I cheered louder than anyone. Several people turned to look at the elderly man celebrating so enthusiastically, And I felt proud to be that grandfather, even if my own daughter wished I were invisible. After the ceremony, I tried to approach Emma for pictures, but Jessica intercepted me. "Dad, we're running late for the family dinner. Maybe we can catch up later." Later never came. I drove home alone, put the flowers in a vase, and sat in my kitchen, wondering when I'd become too embarrassing to acknowledge in public. The pattern continued for years. Birthday parties where I wasn't invited because the venue was too upscale for someone like me. Family vacations I couldn't join because I wouldn't fit in with the other families at the resort. Christmas dinners that got moved to restaurants I supposedly wouldn't enjoy, leaving me to spend holidays alone with takeout Chinese food and old movies. Jessica's friends knew I existed, but in the abstract way rich people know about poor relatives. "Oh, Jessica's father lives in that little house in Queens. He's very independent for his age. Such a character with all his old-fashioned ways." They spoke about me like I was a quaint artifact from a simpler time. Not quite suitable for modern company, but harmless enough to mention in passing. The twins, now 18 and heading to college, barely knew me at all. Emma was polite but distant during our rare interactions, clearly coached on how to manage conversations with her eccentric grandfather. Sophie hadn't spoken to me directly in 2 years, communicating only through nods and smiles when absolutely necessary. I'd become a stranger in my own family. Tolerated but never welcomed, included but never embraced. What Jessica never bothered to discover was how I spent my days. She assumed I shuffled around in my small house in Queens, watching television and complaining about modern life. She knew I still drove my old Honda to the grocery store and the library, still maintained the garden Margaret had loved, still wore clothes that looked like they belonged to a different decade. But she never asked about the 3 mornings a week I spent at the warehouse in Long Island City, or the phone calls I took at all hours, or the reason I could afford to maintain a house in Queens despite never mentioning a pension or Social Security income. In Jessica's mind, I was surviving on whatever savings a construction worker could accumulate over 40 years, probably struggling to make ends meet, but too proud to ask for help. She occasionally offered to assist with bills or groceries, offers I politely declined, which only reinforced her assumption that I was barely getting by on fixed income and stubborn independence. The truth was considerably more complicated, but Jessica had never shown enough interest in my actual life to discover it. She saw what she expected to see, an aging, blue-collar worker who'd outlived his usefulness, someone to be managed rather than understood, tolerated rather than celebrated. And for 15 years, I let her believe exactly that, curious to see how far her assumptions would take her. What I didn't anticipate was how dramatically those assumptions would shift the moment she discovered I had something she wanted.
The phone call that changed everything came on a Tuesday morning in March. Jessica's voice was different, strained in a way I hadn't heard since Margaret's funeral 15 years ago. "Dad, we need to talk. Can I come over this afternoon? It's important." I agreed, curious about what could possibly be urgent enough to warrant a personal visit to my embarrassing little house in Queens. She arrived at 2 o'clock sharp, wearing a charcoal business suit that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. But something was off. Jessica usually radiated the confident energy of someone who controlled every aspect of her carefully constructed life. Today, she seemed nervous, almost fragile, like she was preparing for a conversation she didn't want to have. We sat in my living room, surrounded by furniture Margaret had chosen decades ago, drinking coffee from mismatched mugs I'd collected from various diners over the years. Jessica kept glancing around the room as if seeing it for the first time, taking inventory of the faded wallpaper, the ancient television, the family photos that still included her from happier times. "Dad," she began, then stopped. "I need to ask you about something, and I hope you'll be honest with me." She pulled out her phone and showed me a photograph of a document. It was a shipping invoice addressed to Harold Martinez for a delivery to Martinez Holdings, LLC, at a warehouse address in Long Island City. The invoice was for industrial equipment worth $43,000. My coffee suddenly tasted bitter. Where did you get this? I asked, keeping my voice steady. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Emma found it, Jessica said. She's been doing research for her college economics project about small business ownership in New York. She was looking through public business registrations and found Martinez Holdings. When she saw your name listed as the owner, she thought it was a mistake. But then she started digging deeper. Jessica opened a folder she'd brought with me and spread papers across my coffee table. Business registration documents, property tax records, shipping manifests, all bearing the name Martinez Holdings, LLC, all showing an address that was definitely not my little house in Queens. "Dad," she said quietly, "what is Martinez Holdings, and why didn't you ever tell me you owned a business?" I set down my coffee mug and looked at my daughter, really looked at her, for the first time in years. The desperation in her eyes wasn't about curiosity or hurt feelings about being kept in the dark. This was about money. Jessica had discovered I wasn't the barely scraping by retiree she'd assumed I was, and she was calculating what that might mean for her family's financial future. "It's a small import business," I said finally. "Nothing fancy. I buy surplus construction materials from overseas suppliers and resell them to contractors in the tri-state area. Started it about 20 years ago when I realized I knew enough about the construction industry to spot good deals." Jessica leaned forward. "How small? What kind of volume are we talking about?" The question told me everything I needed to know about why she was really here. Not concern for my well-being, not curiosity about my life, not regret over 15 years of treating me like an embarrassment. Jessica had discovered I had money, and she wanted to know exactly how much. "Large enough to keep me comfortable," I said. "Why do you ask?" She shifted in her chair, and I could see her calculating how to approach this conversation. "Dad, I'm worried about you. You're 73 years old, running a business by yourself, driving that old car, living alone in this house. What happens if something happens to you? What happens to the business?" I'd been waiting 15 years for Jessica to express concern about my well-being. Now that it had finally arrived, it came wrapped in questions about business succession and asset management. "I manage fine," I said. "The business mostly runs itself these days. Good relationships with suppliers, steady customer base, reliable employees who handle most of the day-to-day operations." She pulled out another document. "Dad, according to these tax records, Martinez Holdings generated over $2 million in revenue last year. That's not a small business. That's a significant enterprise. And you're trying to handle all of this alone." The numbers were accurate, but Jessica was drawing the wrong conclusions. Revenue isn't profit, and profit isn't personal income. But I could see she wasn't interested in those distinctions. She'd found evidence that her embarrassing father was more financially successful than she'd imagined, and she was already planning how to insert herself into the situation. "Jessica," I said, carefully, "why are you really here? What's this actually about?" Her composure cracked slightly. "Dad, David and I have been talking. The girls are starting college next year, both of them, and even with our salaries, the financial pressure is enormous. Tuition, room and board, expenses for both the twins simultaneously. We're looking at over $100,000 annually for the next 4 years. I nodded, understanding where this was headed. "And you're wondering if I might be able to help with educational expenses?" "Not just that," she said quickly. "We're concerned about your long-term care planning. You're living alone, managing a complex business, handling financial decisions that could affect your security in retirement. David thinks it would be wise to have some kind of family involvement in your financial planning." David thinks. Not Jessica thinks, not we think together as a family. David, the investment banker who had never spoken more than 10 words to me at any family gathering, had opinions about how I should manage my money? "What kind of involvement?" I asked. She pulled out a business card. "David's firm has an estate planning division. They specialize in succession planning for small business owners, wealth preservation,
tax optimization strategies. They could help you structure everything properly, make sure the business continues if something happens to you, ensure your assets are protected and distributed according to your wishes. Protected and distributed, the language of people who were already planning how to spend money that wasn't theirs yet. And in return, I prompted. Jessica looked confused. In return for what? For this professional financial planning assistance that David's firm would provide, what would they expect in return? She shifted uncomfortably. Well, obviously there would be fees for professional services, but Dad, think of it as an investment in your own security and peace of mind. And it would give us a chance to be more involved in your life, to make sure you're taken care of properly as you get older. More involved in my life. After 15 years of being too embarrassed to include me in family activities, Jessica suddenly wanted to be involved in my financial decisions. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden Margaret had planted decades ago. The spring flowers were starting to bloom, just like they had every year since she died, tended by the man Jessica assumed was too poor and incompetent to manage his own affairs. "Jessica," I said without turning around, "in all the years since your mother passed away, how many times have you visited this house?" She was quiet for a moment. "Dad, you know I've been busy with work and the girls and—" "How many times?" I repeated. "Maybe 10, she admitted. Maybe 12 times total. And how many times have you called to ask how I was doing? Not because you needed something or had news to share, but just to check on my well-being." The silence stretched longer this time. "I don't know," she said finally. "Not enough, probably." I turned back to face her. "Dad, for 15 years, you've made it clear that I embarrass you, that my clothes aren't nice enough, my car isn't new enough, my conversation isn't sophisticated enough for your social circle. You've excluded me from family events, kept your daughters away from me, and treated me like a liability you had to manage rather than a father you loved. Dad, that's not fair. I never meant—" "Now you've discovered I have more money than you expected, and suddenly you want to be involved in my life. Suddenly you're concerned about my well-being and my long-term care. Suddenly David, who has barely acknowledged my existence, has opinions about my financial planning." Jessica's face was red. "Dad, I know I haven't been the best daughter, but that doesn't mean I don't care about you. This isn't just about money." But it was about money, and we both knew it. The timing made that undeniable. 15 years of treating me like an embarrassment, and the moment Jessica discovered I wasn't the financial burden she'd assumed I was, she was sitting in my living room with estate planning documents and talk of family involvement in my business decisions. "I need some time to think about this," I said. "This is a lot to process, and I want to make sure I understand all the implications before making any decisions." Jessica gathered her papers with obvious disappointment. "Of course, Dad, take all the time you need, but don't wait too long. David says there could be significant tax advantages to getting proper structures in place before the end of the fiscal year." Even her parting words were about David's financial advice and tax optimization, not about rebuilding our relationship, not about healing 15 years of distance between us, not about getting to know her father as a person rather than an asset to be managed. After she left, I sat in my kitchen and thought about Margaret. She'd always said that people reveal their true character when they think something is at stake. For 15 years, Jessica had believed nothing was at stake with our relationship. I was just her embarrassing father who would eventually become her financial responsibility. Now she'd discovered something was at stake, and her true character was revealing itself clearly.
The second visit came exactly 1 week later, but this time Jessica brought reinforcements. David arrived wearing his most expensive suit and carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check would have been if I'd needed one. Behind them walked a woman I'd never met, introduced as Patricia Hawthorne from David's estate planning division.
They arranged themselves in my living room like a corporate takeover team, spreading documents across my coffee table with the efficiency of people who'd done this before. Jessica seemed different this time, more confident, like she'd spent the week preparing for a negotiation rather than a family conversation. "Dad," Jessica began, "we've been doing some research since our last conversation." She opened a thick folder filled with printed pages. "We found the corporate filings for Martinez Holdings, and frankly, we're concerned about what we discovered." David leaned forward with the kind of smile investment bankers use when they're about to explain why you need their services. "Harold, may I call you Harold? The structure you have in place is extremely vulnerable from a tax perspective. You're essentially throwing money away every quarter." I'd been called Harold by plenty of people over the years, but never by someone who was simultaneously trying to get control of my money while acting like he was doing me a favor. Patricia opened her own briefcase and pulled out what looked like a presentation deck. "Mr. Martinez, I've prepared a comprehensive analysis of your current situation and some recommendations for optimization." She flipped to the first page, which showed a flowchart of corporate structures and tax implications. What they'd discovered during their research was impressive, I had to admit. Public records had revealed that Martinez Holdings owned not just the import business, but also 3 warehouse properties in Long Island City, 2 office buildings in Manhattan, and a portfolio of residential properties across Queens and Brooklyn. The corporate filings showed annual revenues that had grown from $2 million to over $8 million in the past 5 years. What they hadn't discovered, because it wasn't in public records, was the full scope of what those properties were actually worth, or the fact that Martinez Holdings was itself owned by a holding company registered in Delaware, which was in turn owned by a trust that had been accumulating assets for over 20 years. But Jessica was clearly impressed by what they'd found so far. "Dad, according to these documents, you own over $12 million in real estate alone. That's not including liquid assets, business inventory, or equipment. We're talking about a substantial estate that needs proper management." Patricia flipped through several pages of charts and graphs. "Mr. Martinez, your current tax burden is approximately 40% higher than it needs to be. With proper restructuring, we could save you hundreds of thousands annually while setting up appropriate succession planning for your family." Family. They kept using that word like it meant something after 15 years of treating me like a shameful secret. David pulled out his own set of documents. "Harold, I've prepared a preliminary estate plan that addresses the immediate concerns while positioning everything for optimal long-term outcomes." He showed me pages covered with legal terminology and organizational charts. "We're recommending the establishment of a family trust with Jessica as the primary beneficiary and successor trustee." Successor trustee. The person who would control everything if something happened to me. "The beauty of this structure," Patricia continued, "is that it provides immediate tax benefits while ensuring business continuity. Jessica would assume operational oversight of Martinez Holdings, working with our firm to optimize performance and manage the transition of responsibilities as you enter your retirement years." Retirement years. Operational oversight. They were talking about me like I was already dead. I looked at Jessica, who was nodding along with everything the professionals were saying. She had brought these people into my home to explain to me why I needed to give her control of my money. Not just access to it, not just involvement in decisions about it, but actual legal control through trust structures and successor arrangements. "This is very thorough," I said finally. "How long did it take you to put this together?" Patricia smiled. "We worked through the weekend. When Jessica explained your situation, we prioritized getting you a comprehensive analysis as quickly as possible." My situation. As if I was some kind of problem that needed solving, rather than a person who'd successfully built and managed multiple businesses for over 2 decades. Jessica leaned forward. "Dad, I know this is a lot to take in, but we really think this is the best path forward. You've done amazing work building all of this, but managing an estate this size is complicated. You shouldn't have to handle it alone anymore." Shouldn't have to. Not couldn't if I wanted to, not might benefit from help with, but shouldn't have to, as if I was no longer capable of managing my own affairs. David opened another folder. "Harold, there's one more thing we need to discuss. During our research, we discovered some concerning patterns in your business operations. Several large cash transactions, irregular filing schedules, some vendor relationships that might not be properly documented for tax purposes." He was suggesting my business wasn't properly managed, possibly even implying some kind of impropriety in my record-keeping. "I'm not sure what you mean," I said. Patricia jumped in smoothly. "Oh, nothing inappropriate, I'm sure, but the IRS has become very aggressive at auditing small businesses, especially those with substantial cash flows and older proprietors who might not be familiar with current compliance requirements." Older proprietors who might not be familiar with compliance requirements. They were suggesting I was too old and incompetent to run my own business without triggering an IRS investigation. "The solution," David continued, "is to bring everything under professional management immediately. Our firm handles all compliance issues for our trust clients. We ensure everything meets current regulatory standards and provide full documentation for any government inquiries." For a fee, I assumed. Jessica reached across the table and put her hand on mine. "Dad, we're not trying to take anything away from you. We want to protect what you've built and make sure that it continues to benefit the family for generations." Generations. As if the twins who barely spoke to me were going to be running Martinez Holdings someday. "What would my role be in this new structure?" I asked. "You'd be the founding beneficiary. You'd receive distributions from the trust, maintain residence in your current home, and have input on major decisions. But the day-to-day management would be handled by Jessica, working with our professional team." Input on major decisions about my own money. Distributions of my own assets. Residence in my own home. They were offering to let me live off an allowance from my own fortune. And if I chose not to move forward with this plan? The three of them exchanged glances. Jessica's voice got softer. "Dad, we're trying to do this the easy way. But if something happens to you tomorrow, if you have a medical emergency or become incapacitated, there's no structure in place to protect any of this. The courts would have to get involved. It could take years to sort out, and the tax consequences would be devastating." A threat wrapped in concern for my well-being. If I didn't voluntarily give them control, they were suggesting that circumstances might force the issue anyway. "I need time to review all of this. This is a major decision, and I want to consult with my own advisors before making any commitments." "Of course," David said quickly. "But Harold, time is a factor here. The longer we wait, the more vulnerable everything becomes, and there's some time-sensitive tax planning opportunities that expire at the end of this month." Artificial urgency. The classic high-pressure sales tactic. Jessica gathered the documents they'd brought. "Dad, I'll leave all of this with you to review, but please don't wait too long. We're trying to protect you and protect what you've worked so hard to build." After they left, I sat in my living room surrounded by their estate planning documents and corporate restructuring proposals. Everything was professionally prepared, legally sound, and designed to solve problems I didn't know I had while giving Jessica control over assets she'd never bothered to ask about until last week. I walked to my kitchen, made a cup of coffee, and opened my laptop. It was time to show my daughter and her professional advisors exactly what they were really dealing with. Time to reveal that their research, impressive as it was, had only scratched the surface of what Harold Martinez had actually accomplished in his 73 years. I opened my secure banking portal and started printing statements. Not just for Martinez Holdings, but for the Delaware Holding Company, the family trust that had been established in 1998, and the investment accounts that had been quietly accumulating wealth for over 2 decades. When I finished printing, I had a stack of documents 3 inches thick, showing assets totaling $7.2 million. Jessica and her team had found about 40% of my actual net worth. It was time to call Elena Rodriguez and discuss something more sophisticated than estate planning. It was time to discuss exactly what happens when someone tries to manipulate their way into controlling money that doesn't belong to them.
The phone call to Elena Rodriguez changed everything. I'd known Elena for over 20 years, since she was a young attorney handling real estate closings for small contractors like me. She'd grown into one of the most respected estate planning attorneys in New York, but she still answered her phone personally when I called. "Harold," she said immediately, "what's wrong? You sound stressed." "Elena, I need to see you tomorrow morning. It's about Jessica and some estate planning documents she's brought me. I think I'm being manipulated, and I need to understand my legal position." Elena was quiet for a moment. "Harold, are we talking about undue influence? Financial exploitation? I'm not sure what we're talking about. That's why I need to see you." The next morning, Elena's office in Midtown Manhattan was a world away from my little house in Queens. Floor-to-ceiling windows, mahogany furniture, walls lined with law books and framed degrees from Harvard and Columbia. Elena greeted me with the same warm smile she'd given me 20 years ago when I was just another small business owner trying to understand contract law. I spread Jessica's documents across her conference table. Elena put on her reading glasses and went through everything methodically, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. After 40 minutes, she set down the last page and looked at me with concern. "Harold, this isn't estate planning. This is a takeover." She pointed to specific clauses in the trust documents. "Look at this language. Jessica becomes the successor trustee immediately upon your incapacity. But the definition of incapacity is incredibly broad. Missing a single business meeting, failing to respond to correspondence within 72 hours, any medical event requiring hospitalization. These triggers are designed to activate easily." I felt cold despite the warm office. What does that mean in practical terms? It means Jessica could petition a court to declare you incapacitated based on almost any circumstance, and once that happens, she gains complete control of all assets in the trust. You become dependent on distributions she approves, living in property she manages with no legal recourse to reclaim control. Elena flipped to another section. "And look at this compensation structure for the successor trustee. Jessica would receive an annual management fee of 3% of total assets, plus additional fees for any transactions or major decisions. On a $7 million estate, that's over $200,000 annually just for managing your money." $200,000 a year to control my own assets? Elena continued reading. "There's also language here that allows the successor trustee to relocate trust assets for optimization purposes. Jessica could literally sell your house, move you into assisted living, and use the proceeds to fund investment strategies you never approved." The room felt like it was spinning. "Elena, if I sign these documents, what happens to my control over my own life?" "You lose it completely. Once assets are transferred into this trust structure and Jessica is named successor trustee, you become entirely dependent on her decisions about your financial future. She could cut off your access to funds, force the sale of your properties, even determine where you live based on what she claims is in your best interests." I told Elena about the pressure tactics, the artificial urgency, the suggestions that my business practices might trigger an IRS audit if not professionally managed immediately. "Harold, that's textbook financial exploitation of an elderly person. The threats, the time pressure, the implications that you're incompetent to manage your own affairs. In New York, this kind of behavior toward a senior citizen can constitute criminal elder abuse." Criminal elder abuse. My own daughter was potentially committing a crime against me. Elena leaned forward. "Harold, I need to ask you something directly. Do you have any cognitive impairment, memory issues, or medical conditions that might affect your ability to make financial decisions?" I smiled for the first time in days. Elena, last week, I negotiated a $2 million real estate acquisition over the phone while Jessica was sitting in my living room, assuming I was too old to understand modern business practices. She laughed. That's what I thought. Harold, you're sharper than most of my 50-year-old clients. What Jessica is attempting isn't about protecting you from incapacity. It's about accessing wealth she believes should be hers. Elena pulled out a fresh legal pad. Now let's talk about your actual estate planning needs and how to protect yourself from financial exploitation. But first, I want to understand something. Jessica seems to think your estate is worth about $12 million based on the Martinez Holdings research. Is that accurate? I pulled out the banking statements I'd printed at home. Elena's eyes widened as she reviewed account balances, investment portfolios, and property valuations totaling $7.2 million. Harold, this is substantially more than Jessica knows about, isn't it? Substantially. And Elena, there's something else you need to know. I started recording our conversations after Jessica's first visit. I have documentation of everything she said about wanting control of my assets, everything David has suggested about my incompetence, and every pressure tactic they've used. Elena's expression got very serious. You recorded them without their knowledge? New York is a one-party consent state for recording. As long as I'm part of the conversation, I can legally record it without informing the other parties. Elena nodded approvingly. Harold, those recordings could be crucial evidence if Jessica tries to pursue legal action to gain control of your assets. They establish a pattern of manipulation and undue influence. Over the next 2 hours, Elena and I developed a comprehensive legal strategy. First, she would prepare a formal cease and desist letter to Jessica and David's firm, documenting their attempts to manipulate me into surrendering control of my assets. Second, we would establish a proper estate plan that actually protected my interests while ensuring my granddaughter's education would be funded without giving Jessica access to the principal. Most importantly, Elena would prepare a detailed report documenting Jessica's behavior for potential filing with Adult Protective Services if the manipulation continued. Harold, Elena said as we finished, I want you to understand something. What Jessica is doing isn't just morally wrong, it's legally actionable. Elder financial exploitation is a serious crime in New York, punishable by significant fines and prison time. I felt a mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness that my relationship with my daughter had deteriorated to the point where criminal law was relevant. Relief that I had legal protections against her attempts to control my life. Elena prepared everything within 48 hours. The cease and desist letter was delivered to Jessica's office on Friday afternoon. It detailed every conversation we had had since she'd discovered my business, every pressure tactic she had used, and every suggestion that I was incompetent to manage my own affairs. The letter concluded with a clear warning. Any further attempts to manipulate, coerce, or pressure Harold Martinez into surrendering control of his assets will be reported to appropriate authorities and may result in criminal charges for elder financial exploitation. Jessica called me that evening. Her voice was different again, not nervous, this time but angry. Dad, what the hell is this letter? You hired an attorney to threaten me? Jessica, I hired an attorney to protect myself from financial exploitation. Financial exploitation? Dad, we were trying to help you. We were trying to protect your assets and make sure you're taken care of. By taking control of my money and paying yourself $200,000 annually to manage assets I've successfully managed for decades? There was silence on the line. Then Jessica's voice got cold. Dad, you're making a mistake. David's firm has been very patient with your stubbornness, but there are other ways to handle situations like this. Other ways? Like what, Jessica? Like competency evaluations, like court-appointed guardianship proceedings, like medical assessments of your ability to make rational financial decisions. She was threatening to have me declared legally incompetent if I didn't voluntarily give her control of my money. Jessica, I said calmly, this conversation is being recorded. You just threatened to have me declared incompetent because I refused to give you access to my assets. That's exactly the kind of elder abuse my attorney warned me about. The line went dead.
Jessica had hung up on me. Within an hour, Alana called me back. "Harold, I just received a very interesting phone call from David's firm. They want to schedule a meeting to discuss a resolution that serves everyone's interests. They're backing down." The threat of criminal elder abuse charges had accomplished what 15 years of trying to maintain a relationship with my daughter had not. Jessica finally understood that her father was not the helpless old man she'd assumed he was. But I also understood something else. The daughter that I'd raised and loved had become someone willing to have her own daughter declared legally incompetent in order to steal her life savings. Some bridges, once burned, cannot be rebuilt.
6 months after the legal threats ended Jessica's attempt to control my assets, I received an unexpected phone call. It was Emma, my granddaughter, calling from her college dorm room at Columbia University. "Grandpa Harold," she said, her voice shaky, "I need to talk to you about something important. Can I come visit you this weekend?" I hadn't seen Emma since the previous Christmas, where she'd been polite but distant, clearly coached by her mother on how to interact with the grandfather who'd caused such drama in their family. But something in her voice was different now, more mature, less rehearsed. She arrived Saturday afternoon carrying a backpack and looking nothing like the polished young woman who'd been raised in Westchester County privilege. Her designer clothes had been replaced with simple jeans and a college sweatshirt. Her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail instead of the elaborate styling her mother preferred. Most tellingly, she'd taken public transportation to Queens instead of calling for a car service. "Grandpa," she said as we sat in my living room, "I owe you an apology. Actually, I owe you several apologies." Emma pulled out a notebook filled with handwritten pages. "After everything that happened with Mom and the lawyers, I started thinking about how little I actually knew about you. So I did some research, the kind I should have done years ago, as your granddaughter, instead of for a college economics project." She opened the notebook. "I found the Korean War records. 3 Purple Hearts, Bronze Star for Valor, 2 years in a prisoner of war camp. I never knew any of that because no one ever told me, and I never bothered to ask." I shifted uncomfortably. "Emma, that was a long time ago. It's not something I talk about much." "But you should talk about it," she insisted. "I found articles about your construction company, too. Martinez Construction built half the affordable housing developments in Queens during the 1980s and 1990s. You provided jobs for hundreds of immigrant families, helped people buy their first homes, created entire neighborhoods." She flipped to another page. "And I found the scholarship records, the Harold and Margaret Martinez Education Foundation. You've put 47 kids through college over the past 15 years, kids whose parents worked construction, whose families couldn't afford tuition, who are now doctors and engineers and social workers." I looked at my granddaughter, really looked at her, and saw something I hadn't seen before. Emma wasn't just reciting research she'd done, she was genuinely proud of her grandfather, maybe for the first time in her life. "Emma, why are you telling me this?" I asked gently. "Because I realized that while Mom was spending 15 years being embarrassed by you, you were spending those same 15 years quietly helping dozens of families build better lives. While she was worried about what David's parents thought of your Walmart shirts, you were making sure kids like Maria Santos could become the first doctor in her family." She pulled out a printed email. "Maria Santos sent me this when she found out I was your granddaughter. She's a pediatric resident at Mount Sinai now. She wrote, 'Your grandfather changed my entire family's trajectory. He didn't just pay for my education, he believed in me when no one else would.'" Emma's eyes were filling with tears. "Grandpa, you've been a hero to strangers while your own family treated you like you were worthless. That's not just wrong, it's shameful." She closed the notebook. "I came here to ask you something, and I'll understand if you say no. I want to transfer to Queens College. I want to move back to New York and get to know my grandfather properly. I want to learn about the business, about the foundation, about the man my mother was too blind to see." Emma paused. "And I want to apologize for Sophie. She's still drinking Mom's poison about family reputation and social status.
But she's 18 now, and she'll have to make her own choices about what kind of person she wants to be. I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Hope for my family's future. "Emma," I said, "transferring schools is a big decision. What does your mother think about this?" Emma's expression hardened. "Mom thinks I'm making a mistake that will hurt my social prospects. She's threatening to cut off my education funding if I leave Columbia for a C-Uni school. She says associating too closely with you will damage my reputation in the circles that matter for my career." Even after the legal intervention, even after being confronted with evidence of her financial exploitation attempts, Jessica was still trying to control her daughter's relationship with their grandfather through money. "What did you tell her?" I asked. "I told her that I'd rather take student loans and work part-time jobs than continue living off money that comes with conditions about who I'm allowed to love and respect. I told her that reputation in her social circle means nothing if it requires me to abandon my own grandfather." Emma reached across the table and took my hand. "Grandpa, I don't need Mom's money to get an education, but I do need your guidance to become the kind of person who builds up communities instead of tearing down family members." Over the following months, Emma transferred to Queens College and moved into the spare bedroom in my house. She studied business and economics while working part-time at Martinez Holdings, learning the import business from the ground up. More importantly, she spent evenings helping me review scholarship applications and visiting the construction sites where her great-grandfather had built his legacy. She also started what she called the Family Rehabilitation Project, reaching out to relatives I hadn't seen in years, cousins and aunts who'd been told I was a difficult old man, but who remembered the Harold Martinez who'd helped them find jobs, co-signed mortgages, and showed up for every family milestone that mattered. The Christmas dinner that year was different. Instead of spending the holiday alone with takeout Chinese food, I found myself hosting 12 relatives in my little Queens house, sharing stories and laughter with family members who'd been kept away by Jessica's embarrassment about my lifestyle. Jessica wasn't there. She'd made it clear that anyone who chose to associate with me was choosing sides against her. Most of the family chose me. Sophie came by in February, curious despite herself about what Emma had discovered in her new life with her grandfather. She stayed for 3 hours, asking questions about the war, about building the construction company, about why I chose to live simply despite having substantial wealth. When she left, she hugged me for the first time in 5 years. She didn't transfer schools or move back to New York, but she started calling once a week and visiting every few months. Progress comes in small steps sometimes. The legal situation with Jessica reached a final resolution in March. Elena Rodriguez negotiated a settlement that protected my assets while establishing clear education trusts for both Emma and Sophie. Jessica received nothing beyond what I chose to give voluntarily, and any further attempts to manipulate or exploit me would result in criminal charges. Jessica never apologized. She never acknowledged that her behavior was wrong, never expressed regret for 15 years of treating me like an embarrassment, never showed any understanding of the damage she had caused to our family relationships. But I learned something important during those months of legal battle and family healing. I learned that love isn't about blood relation or shared history. Love is about seeing people clearly, appreciating their worth, and choosing to support their growth and happiness. Emma saw me clearly and chose love. Sophie started seeing me clearly and chose gradual reconnection. Jessica saw my bank account and chose manipulation. Today, Emma is finishing her business degree while managing the Scholarship Foundation. She's planning to take over Martinez Holdings when I'm ready to retire, not because she feels entitled to inherit my wealth, but because she wants to continue the work of building communities and helping families. Sophie visits monthly and has started bringing friends to meet her grandfather, the one that she had been taught to hide from social circles, but now introduces with pride. And Jessica continues living in Westchester County, still worried about what David's family thinks of her background, still managing her social reputation, still treating relationships like business transactions. Some bridges can be rebuilt with patience and love, Others have to be let go for the sake of everyone's well-being. At 74, I finally learned the difference. And I've learned that love isn't always blood. But blood can become family again if people are willing to see clearly and choose love over money. The Harold Martinez that worried about embarrassing his successful daughter doesn't exist anymore. In his place is a grandfather who knows his worth, protects his boundaries, and invests his love in people who value both him and the communities he spent a lifetime building. That's a trade I'd make again every single time.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.